Welcome to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where you can learn and be inspired by real-world examples of how technology is transforming businesses and reshaping industries in a language everyone can understand. Here is your host, Neil C. Hughes.
Welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast. Every now and again, I like to step out of my comfort zone and let my curious mind wander and learn about subjects that blow my mind and try and make sense of it all. And today is one of those days because I want to explore and try and get a greater understanding of the metaverse. And today's guest, who is challenged with helping me understand more about that, is Sam Engelbart. And Sam is an established media and tech investor, a licensed attorney and content producer who has created, acquired and or financed a broad range of traditional and digital businesses, and not to mention dozens of films and television shows over the past decade. And I thought I spin a lot of plates. But the reason I invited him on today is because he's a co-founder and partner at Galaxy Digital, which is a blockchain and digital asset merchant bank. And he's also the head of Galaxy Interactive, a $325 million fund that focuses exclusively on companies and projects with a particular emphasis on video game studios, esports, digital objects, virtual and augmented reality, lifestyle applications, and related infrastructure tech. And for those of you that don't know, Galaxy Interactive is one of the world's largest dedicated video game and interactive content and technology investors. But I don't want to reveal too much now because we're going to get Sam on to talk about all that. So buckle up and hold on tight so I can invite you on a trip to the metaverse as I beam your ears all the way to Aspen, where Sam is waiting to speak with us now. So a massive warm welcome to the show. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Sure. My name's Sam Engelbart. I'm an investor in interactive content and technology companies. I actually co-founded a company called Galaxy Digital with Mike Novogratz and a few other partners a few years ago, and then started the interactive division inside of Galaxy Digital. So we're a stage agnostic venture investment business. We focus on interactive content and technology companies. Emphasis on and specialty, I would say, in blockchain technology, and we have our roots really as a blockchain technology company. So I'm sure we're going to talk about that a bit at some point in this call. But prior to that, I spent the first half of my career really focused on traditional, or what I usually call old media, which was film production and exhibition. I helped build a few different chains of movie theaters over the years. We did television production for a while, a few different things in the music industry, et cetera. So really all the sort of old tech type media investments and businesses I've been involved with and was heavily involved with for a number of years. And then for the second half of my career, I've really focused much more on this intersection of content and technology. So again, that's emerging tech like blockchain and VR and AR and cloud and so on. And all very much around this overarching thesis that we're evolving into a sort of a digital species. And as we start to spend the majority of our time inside of these digital worlds that we're creating for ourselves, quite interesting things are happening. And we're looking at the companies that are addressing that evolution of our species, really.
And I'm curious, I've got to ask, what put you on the path that you're on now in talking about blockchain technology and the tech industry, especially because you did mention the running cinemas there. So I'm curious, what put you in the tech industry?
I think if you were spending any time focused on media and content from 2000 to 2010, it would have been very hard not to be sucked into digital and digital tech, just given that it was this was a period of time where technology platforms were really starting to penetrate into content and the way that we consume content and create content and so on. So I think it was largely that. It was that I was financing in a bunch of different ways, a lot of film and television shows, and we had a large chain of movie theaters that people were going to. And I was just, I think, intellectually curious enough about what was going on. And obviously I was a 20-something and 30-something-year-old person in the world and starting to engage myself with cell phones. And then, when it was MySpace and Facebook and YouTube and so on. So as all of this was happening and we were looking at our businesses and realizing that content was going to be made in a very different way. And there was nobody that didn't see that, I think. And it was going to be made differently. It was going to be consumed differently. Stories were going to be told differently. And, we all read history books, I guess. And I'm certainly a student of history broadly and the evolution of media more specifically. And so it was really that and an interest in learning more about what was going on. And so we started looking at, initially it was digital content and some of the early streaming businesses and so on. And then I just, like so many other things in my life, Neil, I think I just kind of got sucked down a path, driven by curiosity more than anything else. And as I dug into things and, I remember I had I made my first game studio investment in 2009, which is a funny sort of full circle story that I can come back to. But, because we wound up 2 years ago, I wound up leading the Series A for a company called Mythical Games, which was founded and run by the same person who stepped into my very first video game studio and, came on to run it in 2015 and ultimately was very helpful in selling it to Niantic. So I kind of came full circle with him, and it was a completion of what I've been looking at in video games for a while. But my first real emerging tech hardware company investment was in an eye tracking technology company called iFluence that was supposed to be an AR, business to help kind of allow you to control AR heads up displays with your eyes. And it wound up, through a variety of twists and turns, wound up being a VR company, and was bought by Google. And then that sent me kind of down a path of really being fascinated by VR tech, and which continued into spending a lot of time with some out-of-home VR companies like The Void, and that pushed me more in the direction of video games too. And so it's just that all these things are connected and related. And blockchain was an accident too in some ways. I was living in LA, and I think there's a community of people that were really influential in building out the Bitcoin and blockchain ecosystem. People who really largely came from the video game world first. And that was really where I think in so many ways, video games were one of the first places where people got very comfortable and familiar with digital objects, and a lot of what they were doing inside of these video games made sense to them when they started to see it applied to things like Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies, and ultimately some of the blockchain technology platforms that emerged. And so just by proximity and by knowing some of these people in the sort of LA and Southern California based crypto and blockchain community, that was my start. And I guess I bought my first Bitcoin in 2013 and didn't really pay much attention to the space at all, other than casually and occasionally with these people when I'd run into them. And then cut forward a few more years, and it became something that was growing at such a rate and gathering so much of the public's attention that I decided it was something I really had to focus on and wanted to learn more about. And then that turned into several years of going very deep in the blockchain tech world.
Fantastic. And just promise me you weren't the guy that bought a pizza with that first bit.
I was not the guy that bought a pizza with that, but the early people that really taught me about blockchain and brought me into that world, I'm talking now initially of a guy named Brock Pierce, who was quite well known in the Bitcoin world, and then ultimately helped Brendan Bloomer, who's the CEO of Block One, a software development company that created the EOS protocol, which is one of these layer one blockchain protocols. I mean, Brock and Brendan and this whole crew, they were the guys organizing parties on the anniversary of that pizza date, for years. It was very much a date forever marked in the world of Bitcoin people regarding the sort of the significance of what's possible in this space. And, Brendan's another one where Brock ended up introducing me to Brendan, and I invested in the only equity financing round for Block One. And then Block One wound up having an extraordinarily successful, sale of their EOS token. And now the fund that we manage, Block One, is our largest LP, and we're working very closely with Block One in building out this portfolio of interactive companies to make sure that we really show the world what's possible with EOS.io technology and why we think blockchain is going to play such an important role in the interactive space. So I'm sure we're going to come back to that. But again, it's just when you ask how I got started or what the path was, I always try to tell the story, and I just realized that it's all of these overlapping and interconnected people. And the only real consistent thread that I've ever been able to really pull through the story of my career and life has just been one of following my intellectual curiosity more than anything else, and trying to be around people that I enjoy talking with, thinking with, building things with. And that's ultimately just been my consistent approach to life.
And somebody that's also curious, one of the reasons that I invited you on the podcast today was to talk about the incredibly cool concept of building the metaverse. But before we go there, can you explain exactly what the metaverse is in a language that everyone can understand now?
Yeah, I mean, I will try. I think it's interesting because I find myself saying recently, especially as the metaverse is this concept that's gaining a lot of attention. And it's definitely become a topic of the day and a meme and so on. And people are really latching on to, who's building it, what is it, how are we going to use it, etc. So for me, the first step has always just been, okay, can we even agree on a definition, and can we come up with exactly what you're asking? What is it? Are we talking about the same thing? And then we can talk about whether, who's building it and whether we're going to get there. I always start with, at least to express the broad idea, I kind of like to start with Neil Stephenson's description and then get a little more granular from there, because I think in many ways he put out into the world one of the most sort of publicly recognized concepts of the metaverse. And, in his work, he talks about the metaverse as a collective virtual shared space, something, that's created by the convergence of like virtually enhanced physical reality and physically persistent virtual space. So you're kind of getting this thing that includes the sum of all virtual worlds, augmented reality, the internet, etc. And that is like this somewhat dense idea, but when you read his stuff and his novels and you really see what's happening, and then it makes sense, and you realize why that description works. But I think it's my friend Matt Ball, who's really become one of my absolute favorite public media and technology intellectuals in the last few years. He has done a great job over the last few months, I think, taking this idea, deeper, but at the same time, articulating some of the key characteristics of the metaverse when we're talking about it. And this is a little simpler to follow, but he talks about the idea of it having these necessary traits: persistence. It needs to be a living world. He talks about the idea of concurrent presence and some meaningful scale around how many people can be in this world at any particular time. It almost always needs to be anything like the metaverse we have in mind. There needs to be a fully functioning economy. People need to be able to make, buy, and sell things. There needs to be this concept of physical and digital continuity. So we think about a world where you may have physical objects in physical space, and you're gonna enter the metaverse, so to speak, or you enter some digital environment, and there needs to be continuity inside of that environment of your stuff, so that you can really move seamlessly and with little friction between physical and digital, and also your identity between the physical and digital space can be consistent. And that brings us to like the next point, which is this idea of interoperability of identity and data and virtual goods. So there is like, you really need to think, and when I think about the metaverse, and certainly if I'm talking about the metaverse in the way that's intellectually really interesting to me, that the big version of the metaverse, I'm thinking about the idea that I can maintain a consistent identity across both my physical life and enter into these different aspects of digital life and carry the same stuff, be the same person, make sure people know who I am, etc. At that point, and I'm sure we're going to end up talking about it, though, it's interesting because I think identity is a concept that we also just need to make sure we don't conflate with the idea of a persona. So I'm not necessarily saying that you need to appear as exactly the same person to everybody you encounter in these different digital spaces, but I do think it's important that you maintain one consistent identity, or where in the truest sense of the word. But we can come back to that if you want.
Sure. And what are the technological, legal, economic, and social challenges to building it and actually scaling it up as well?
I mean, I think any of these conditions like that I just laid out, for each one of those, there is a host of technological, legal, economic, social challenges, I would say, just to accomplish any one of those items, like if we were going to try to do any one in a vacuum. And so in some ways, I guess you think the challenges to that are magnified when we try to accomplish this whole set of things together, right? I mean, persistence is, in and of itself is not an especially hard technological problem. But if you try to do persistence at massive scale and then also in a way that feels alive to all the inhabitants of this digital virtual world, I mean, that starts to get very hard technologically. Economically and socially, I think a lot of those challenges really reveal themselves when you think about continuity, when you think about the fact that all the inhabitants of this metaverse are effectively co-located digitally inside of some sort of unified place. Assuming we're talking again about that sort of strong definition of the metaverse that I have in mind. But they're going to be physically located all over the world. They're going to will still be subject to the laws of their physical location. They'll probably be largely reliant and tied into their local economy, their local currency, et cetera. So, when you talk about all these things, you can start to really see what the challenges are. It's also, why I think so much of this is going to need to be solved technologically because, again, like blockchain, for example, is going to play an important role in solving some of this stuff to the extent that it enables relatively frictionless payments across borders or that allows you to own your digital objects and take them in and out of digital environments into different, wallets and so on. So there's we're going to always be balancing, I think, technological developments that are going to be necessary to pull off anything like what we're talking about with the challenges socially and politically in particular that come when you're really trying to define and build effectively an entirely new environment for people to spend their time in and earn their living in, etc.
So if we were to zoom out for a moment, how do you think we should all be thinking about identity in and across all these virtual worlds?
I think for the metaverse, for us to mean anything interesting when we say metaverse or talk about the metaverse, I think we ultimately need to be able to maintain a consistent identity across our digital and physical worlds. And again, I'm imagining that at some level, the metaverse I have in mind is the thing that's enabling you to create an identity and carry it across and between the different physical and digital, silos that you inhabit or that you spend time or money in. So that kind of brings me back to that point of we got to be careful not to conflate this idea of identity with the idea of one's public appearance or their persona, because these things they're really used interchangeably a lot when I hear these conversation about the metaverse or about in and around this theme. And I think it's confusing because I think persona and identity actually mean two very different things. So when I talk about identity, I guess I'm talking about, in the most literal sense, I'm talking about the sum of all of somebody's attributes or properties. I don't want to geek out on this too much, but to me, identity is A equals B, if and only if A and B have all of the same properties. That's the technical definition of identity. And so that doesn't mean that an outside observer, and then now if we take it to the context of a digital, virtual world or so on, or even just in our physical daily life, it doesn't mean that an outside observer is aware of all the properties, of Sam when he or she meets me, digitally or physically. And most people who know me actually do know a persona of me. They don't actually have a complete knowledge of my identity. But I think in a really deep and important way, it matters that whether other people know it or not, I can actually draw a straight line through all of these various personas that I've maintained for myself over my lifetime, and still feel like there's real connectivity back to this consolidated identity of me that consists of all of my properties. So I think when we think about identity in and across virtual worlds, to be having the interesting conversation, we have to start to ask ourselves like whether something like this analytical idea of identity is also necessary in these virtual spaces. It's a topic that I've discussed with, countless people at this point, including so many of the CEOs and founders of the companies in our portfolio, and people disagree on it. But at least for me, to really imagine the metaverse in the way that I'm imagining it, I think something like this strong concept of identity is going to be important. And it's a challenge to really figure out how we're going to build that.
And if we look back to 1993, it almost felt like there's that famous cartoon where I think the caption was, on the internet, nobody knows you're a dog. But then here in 2020, of course, it almost feels like this, everything that you do is monitored and stored somewhere, and almost surveillance capitalism it's often referred to. So with all that in mind, can the metaverse be occupied by anonymous or pseudonymous avatars, or will true identity be a necessary condition, do you think?
Yeah, that's such an interesting point in the whole, that idea of 1993 and our early concepts of the internet. The thing that really got me started down this path and focused on any of this type of technology. I mean, I remember being really inspired around the time I was going to law school by the idea of cyber law, and guys like Larry Lessig were writing on this topic extensively, and I was just fascinated by all of it. And he was the first one that was really very vocal about this idea that we've got it wrong. And it's not that you're anonymous on the internet, and this technology is not enabling you to be anonymous. It's doing the opposite. And people need to understand that there is no such thing as anonymity on the internet. I think that, that being said, like you are going to need to be able to, in certain environments, put on a mask, so to speak, whether we're talking about that literally in the physical world or whether we're talking about digitally putting on a different avatar or assuming one of these other personas. I think that if we want people to do anything in this world that resembles what they do in the physical world, and if we believe that these digital worlds are an extension of our physical lives, and then it will be critically important that people do have the opportunity to still, present themselves to the world in different ways and in a way at any particular moment that they want to. And we're going to have a lot of the same challenges of, well, okay, people need and want to be able to do that, but there are environments and contexts where it's not going to be okay, and we're going to need to make sure the technology is going to need to be able to moderate that, so that it's it's one thing if you want to be able to walk into a bar and present yourself in one way, and it's such a big part of being human, I think, that we're able to create stories around ourselves, so that we're able to express ourselves in ways that are designed for the environment that we're inhabiting at any particular time. And so we can't take that away from anybody, and nor would we want to. And in fact, again, the technology will enable that to be done in really interesting and special, powerful, important ways. But it's a different thing if this same person who's wearing mask A is also, walking into their digital bank. And again, this is all stuff that we're doing today, right? Like if you're talking about banking, then we need to make sure that we can verify who you actually are, or that the money that you're spending really came from a particular place. I don't see any of that changing. In fact, I think it's just going to be that, it's going to be that much more important that we build out the platforms in a way that empower people safely to do that, that we're aware of the challenges, because obviously we're seeing it's unfolding, unfortunately, in real time now, the challenges of building out tech platforms that empower certain behavior before we've, at unthinkably huge scale and speed, in ways that were never done before. And so, again, like the anonymous and pseudonymous question and what we can do with our avatars and so on, this is all tied to that same point of you're going to want the ability to wear a mask, but the society is going to need an ability to also know who you are.
And in your opinion, which companies will matter most to the creation of the metaverse over the next decade? By that, I mean, do you think it'll be incumbents that are going to win, or is it going to be created by this new range of tech startups that have got so much more experience with these emerging technologies?
Tough to say. There are obviously several incumbents and startups, but that are tackling different aspects of this bigger mission. And so for sure, I think some of the big technology platforms and companies, the FANG M companies and Epic Games and some of the other big game publishers and so on, like there's a bunch of businesses that are quite far along in their journey that are pushing us in the direction of the metaverse. By building out some of the essential components we've been talking about. And this, by the way, whether or not their stated mission is to build the metaverse. I mean, in the case of Epic, I think there's a reasonable argument to be made that they have, in fact, revealed their mission to be, and Tim Sweeney has revealed to some extent his mission to be the metaverse. Although, I mean, when people have asked him point blank about that recently, he's been clear to say, look, we're a game company, Fortnite is a game, et cetera. But he also says, check back with us down the road, check back with us next year, et cetera. And Tim's spoken enough and talked enough about what his big ambitions are and what some of his philosophical beliefs are and so on, that, it feels to me like they have in some meaningful way, they have committed to this mission. And you're seeing what they're building starts to look at like, it's early days still, but they're doing things that are indicative of a company that really believes in this mission. Now, obviously, I have a portfolio, the Galaxy Interactive portfolio is full of startups that we believe are going to be critically important to building out the metaverse as well. So, I mean, that includes a whole bunch of companies, whether we're talking about Philip Rosedale's company, High Fidelity, which, Philip was was the founder and creator of Second Life and has been one of the leading sort of visionaries on this concept of metaverses. We have companies like Mythical Games in our portfolio, which is a AAA game studio, but they're launching their first game, entirely focused around this idea of true ownership of digital objects, and powered by blockchain technology. We're investors in Raf Koster's company, Playable Worlds. That's a real technology forward. They're building this cloud-based MMO, and Raf is one of the legends of the MMO space and ran Ultima Online and has thought as deeply about immersive virtual worlds and gamified immersive virtual worlds as anybody. You have other companies not in the Galaxy Interactive portfolio of companies like Niantic, for example, that are building these incredibly important pieces of the puzzle. In Niantic's case, they're going after this idea of the AR cloud, which is sort of mapping the physical world so that you can really drop these digital objects anywhere onto it. And that's essential to the integration of digital and physical worlds broadly, and really this idea of enabling people to move themselves and the things they own between worlds easily. So, I mean, I could go on and on and on. There's so many companies that are touching on the piece of it. I mean, it's just an absolutely fascinating time. I do think, and I just continue to hammer this point, but I do think that in terms of technology that's going to play an important part in the tech stack of the companies that matter to this mission, to the metaverse creation of the metaverse mission. I just continue to say, and I'm super biased, obviously, but companies that are building or are aware of, and it's still early today, but ones that are aware of now and that we see evolve over the coming years with a focus on blockchain tech, I think that is, I don't see a scenario where that's not essential to the creation of this immersive digital world we're talking about. I mean, it's I'm not just talking about cryptocurrency, by the way. I'm really talking about blockchain technology. And again, I mean, I have a horse that we've backed in the race in EOS.io, but they're generally speaking about blockchain, this idea of a distributed ledger, the idea of governance and authentication, and what distributed compute makes possible in that way around those concepts. It's just the only solution I can really think of for enabling a safe and secure and immutable digital identity, which is going to be one of these things that's going to be mandatory, and enabling people to really own their digital stuff and do with it what they would do with their physical objects. I think the amount of compute power required to build this metaverse we're talking about, I just can't imagine a way doesn't have to be done with some decentralized platform. Same as storage, also necessary for all of the logistical and financial and security reasons we can imagine. So decentralization of those things is just what blockchain technology is really well suited to solve. So I don't know. To me, I think if we're going to, I don't know that I can name specifically the company, but what we're doing is investing in companies that we think are aware of this and building, around these technologies and attempting to solve these problems.
And for everyone listening that are just hearing about Galaxy Interactive for the very first time, it's my understanding it's one of the largest dedicated video game and interactive content and technology investors with principal investors in player-owned virtual economies. But can you just tell the listeners a little bit more about what it is that makes you guys different from anything else out there?
Sure. I mean, and some of obviously the conversation we've had so far covers this, I guess. But I mean, Galaxy Interactive is the name of a business unit inside of Galaxy Digital. We're the unit of Galaxy Digital that focuses entirely on the interactive content and technology space. So we're investing in companies that live right at that intersection of content and cutting edge tech. The things that differentiate us from a few of the others out there that are maybe focused on the same thing. I guess I always start and remind people that while we're a business unit of Galaxy Digital, we're also functioning in many ways as a partner to this software development company, Block One, which is the blockchain software development company that created the EOS-IO protocol. So they're our largest LP in our fund, and the majority of the capital that we're investing against to this interactive thesis comes from them. So one thing that's different about us, I would say, than some of the other institutional venture funds out there that are investing in the interactive space is, I mean, we are like them. We're technically an independent and financial returns focused fund. But we're on this shared mission, I would say, with Block One to educate the world on the potential of blockchain tech generally, and the EOS-IO protocol specifically, and really invest. I want to invest in great companies that I think ultimately are going to integrate blockchain software into their tech stack. And so we come at it from that angle. We're not that doesn't mean you have to be a blockchain company today in order to work with us. And in fact, lots of companies in our portfolio have not started yet to integrate blockchain tech, and we didn't meet them as blockchain companies. In fact, we're trying to meet great companies that are building, great game developers and great infrastructure technology and, entrepreneurs and so on, where we can be the smart sort of strategic blockchain tech partner at the table, because I think it's a long process. We're several years away still from proving out whether, I'm right and this technology is critically important or I'm wrong. So what I'm trying to do and what's different about us is we want to partner with great companies. We want to bring strategic knowledge and value and a point of view on this technology. And then ultimately, I guess the other important thing to note about us that's unique is we're entirely sector focused. So we're really dedicated entirely to the interactive sector, but we're doing it in an entirely stage agnostic way. And I think the fact that we're so narrowly focused on interactive, it allows, but it also requires us to be able to enter and make an investment in a company really at any stage in its life cycle. So in that way, we're quite different, I would say, than most venture firms that tend to either be early stage or late stage. We're able to make a small seed or even pre-seed investment in a company if we believe in them and they fit our strategic mission and story. Likewise, we can make very late stage, large growth equity investments in a company, if that's when we meet them and that's when we think it's appropriate to get involved and partner with them in their business.
Now, I thought I was a guy that spinned a lot of plates, but I mean, you're an established media and tech investor, a licensed attorney, content producer that has created, acquired and financed a broad range of traditional digital businesses and dozens of films and television shows over the past decade. So you must have overcome many challenges in your career. So given the fallout of COVID-19, is there any candid advice that you could possibly offer to any CEOs or startup founders listening that could just help them in these challenging times?
Well, these are definitely challenging times. I do think certainly in the category of businesses that at least still have, I think, a great opportunity to, reach consumers and are interactive businesses and the sector that I focus on, I guess I would say, relative to most, has weathered the storm so far quite well and is likely to continue to do that. I mean, I think we're in a situation where, despite everything that all the challenges out there, if you are an entrepreneur building a game company or interactive content or tech or so on, you have, I think, this macro growth wave behind you that's going to continue. And I think you also have at the moment just a more captive audience than ever to use your products and play your games, etc. But I guess if you're asking for general advice, I think it's probably the same advice I would give pre-COVID, which is just to be persistent and to focus on trying to solve a problem and satisfy some need in the world. And I think if you're doing that, then you'll weather this storm for sure, and you'll find investors who believe in you and so on. I mean, I'm conscious as I say this that I'm giving such cliched and really hackneyed advice, I guess, but I think it's really true. I think the harder the environment is outside, the more important it is that you really just focus on what you're building, what you're trying to solve, and how you're going to tell that story to people like me or anybody else that at this stage, when you're starting a company, you're in the storytelling phase largely, and you got to find people that really connect with you and relate to your story and want to go on a journey with you. And for me, that's almost always the most important part of looking at an early stage company. It's just, okay, what journey are we going to go on together? And does it make sense? And is it something, do I want to set out with this person or this team and attempt to create things in the world? And I don't know, in some cases, in a lot of ways, I would say the more challenging the environment is, the more important that story is, but also the more that it can resonate with people. And if you have a great story and you show that level of determination and vision, I think you'll generally find people who want to take the ride with you.
Excellent advice. And the cliches are a cliche for a reason. They are.
Yeah, I mean, I know. But sometimes they come out and I'm just like, wow. Okay, did I actually just say that? But it's true.
Yeah. And as someone that is intellectually curious about almost everything out there, is there anything that particularly excites you about the future that will allow us to end our conversation on a hopeful note today?
Oh, wow. I'll be honest with you. Just about everything about the future excites me. That doesn't mean I think that it's all going to be pleasant. And, excitement, it doesn't necessarily mean pleasure. And I think it almost certainly won't all be pleasant going forward. Again, I mean, we've just talked about these are, extraordinarily challenging times, I would say. But I think if I'm right at all about where things are headed, and if we continue to move somewhat aggressively, to keep us on theme of the conversation today, if we continue to move into the development and inhabitants of these virtual worlds, for example, that we've been talking about, so many new opportunities are going to evolve for people. New jobs, new ways to earn a living, new ways to connect with other people, ways to express yourself creatively and intellectually. All of this stuff is, there's a dark side to it for sure, but there's also an incredibly empowering aspect to all of this. And especially for me, one of the most exciting, interesting things to think about really is like, what will the job markets in these virtual economies be? And are they going to be coming along just at a time when a lot of our traditional sort of physical world jobs are in jeopardy? So I don't know. I was thinking like the other day about just how life today, especially if you read the news and we all do, can feel so negative and scary and even hopeless at times. But I think in some ways we have to start from the recognition that things haven't actually really taken a turn for the worse here. I think really we've just somewhat abruptly shined a really bright light on ourselves, and technology enabled us to do that. And as hard as it is to see, and to see this aspect of us, you can't really solve problems until you acknowledge them. So I think, in a meaningful way, people have been forced to wake up here. And so I guess I would say I'm optimistic that we've taken a first really essential step in the right direction.
That's a beautiful moment to end on. But before I do let you go, can I just ask that you remind everyone listening of where they can find you guys online, and equally contact your team if they've got any questions?
Sure. The website, we've got a few different websites between Galaxy Digital and Galaxy Interactive, but I would say the best place to start, just go to galaxyinteractive.io. Or you can get me personally, or you can look under, look for Galaxy Interactive on the socials, LinkedIn and Twitter at least. I don't use Facebook.
That's a topic for another episode right there. But a big thank you for taking the time to come and speak with me today. It's always a pleasure to speak with someone with a curious mind, and I will get you back on later this year to talk about that Facebook comment. But more than anything, just thanks for joining me.
All right, you bet. Great to be on with you. Thanks, Neil.
Now, before today's conversation, I Googled the Metaverse and learned that it is a collective virtual shared space created by the convergence of virtually enhanced physical reality and physical persistent virtual space, including the sum of all virtual worlds, augmented reality and internet. And when I read that, it delivered one of those Bill and Ted moments where I just kind of went, whoa. But Sam made it much more palatable. So a big thank you, Sam, if you do listen back to this, for coming on here and patiently explaining everything. And as for everyone listening, is there anything that you would like to add to today's conversation? Now, as always, I'm the easiest guy in the world to find. Email me, techblogwriter@outlook.com, tweet me, Instagram, LinkedIn, wherever you'd like to DM me. Just look for @NeilC.Hughes. And if you would like to work with me, whether that be launching your own podcast or need help with your CEO or your business's thought leadership blog posts, pop by my website, techblogwriter.co.uk, where you'll also find over 1,250 other tech interviews too. But that's it for today, so a big thank you for listening, and until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thank you for listening to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast with Neil C. Hughes. Remember, technology works best when it brings people together.